Mention UFOs and in the past you would have been greeted with a chorus of derision. But today, lots of people admit to having seen mysterious flying objects. And we're not talking the bewildered in the backwoods. These are astronauts, pilots and defence officials. At the same time, governments around the world have started releasing their classified documents on UFO sightings. And New Zealand's about to follow suit. So Sarah Hall decided to go looking for the evidence.
We're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. Visits to planet Earth by aliens.
I witnessed and watched through a telescope a UFO which hovered over a nuclear weapons storage facility for approximately 10 minutes.
We could see the shape of it. It had a dome. We could see the coronal discharge.
We've set back, we've told the American people that there's no such thing as UFOs. I've been involved where we've covered these objects, we know them to be of extraterrestrials.
If what they're saying seems extraordinary, then hold on to your hats. That was just a sample of the hundreds of defence officials, as well as astronauts, scientists and politicians who have stepped forward in recent years to say aircraft from other planets are visiting Earth.
We lost somewhere between 6 and 8 weapons that morning. Within minutes of having received that second phone call of a UFO hovering outside the front gate.
An alien had come off the craft and had been shot by a military policeman.
4 other objects with different shapes separated from the main one at different times during this close encounter.
It behoves us, in case some of these people in the future or now should turn hostile, to find out who they are, where they come from and what they want.
It's international testimony like this and the release of formerly classified UFO files from several countries that have persuaded others here in New Zealand to come forward. Meet George Richardson. A pilot for 53 years, this is the first time he's publicly told his story about a close encounter when he was piloting an Air New Zealand DC-10 back in 1978.
I was actually leaning forward like this in the airplane, looking for weather more than anything else, and suddenly I spotted out to the left this vehicle which went straight across in front of us. This thing was, I don't know, 150, 200 feet long. It had no wings, no tails, no anything. It was just a tube that had very big and very white windows in it.
Have you ever had any explanation as to what that was?
No, none whatsoever. When I discussed it with the other pilot and the other crew, they just said, no, we better wrap it up, because if we make a noise about it, men in white coats will be there to meet us when we arrive at our destination.
George Richardson says pilots often see unexplained objects in the sky, but airlines frown upon them speaking out.
They really wouldn't want their aircrew to be aired on TV, for example, or on radio saying, I saw a UFO, because somebody would say, hello, I wouldn't fly with them, they've got lunatics on board, you know. So
you the understanding was that you would shut up about what you saw?
Yeah, we just buried it. Because if we'd made a noise about it, we'd be grounded. It was fairly automatic. If you stepped out of line, bang, you're on the ground.
Join us and live in peace, or pursue your present course and face obliteration.
The fear of being ridiculed has been used to great effect when it comes to the controversial subject of UFOs.
I saw it land out in the field.
Now, wait a minute. You saw what land?
A spaceship or something. I saw it.
In the 1950s, there was hysteria in the United States as thousands of people reported seeing UFOs. The switchboards at the Pentagon were jammed. So a CIA panel convened by President Truman decided if UFOs were ridiculed, people would become reluctant to report them.
You're watching News 15 at 10.
Phoenix, Arizona, March the 13th, 1997.
Do these lights belong to visitors from outer space? Hundreds of people across the valley think it's a distinct possibility.
The Air Force claimed it was just military flares, but tens of thousands of people say they witnessed a huge silent craft moving right across the state of Arizona.
It passed right in front of us, just about right above eye's length. My estimate of the size of the craft from the nose as it passed us where we live to the end of the left wing that passed in front of us was over 5,000 foot long. People say, Mike, now you saw a B-2 bomber. My response was we could land all 40 of our B-2 bombers on the wing of that craft.
The then Republican Governor, Fife Symington, held a press conference in which he made fun of the mass sighting.
And now I'll ask Officer Stein and his colleagues to escort the accused into the room so that we may all look upon the guilty party. Don't get him too close to me, please.
The mainstream media dumped the story. The Phoenix Lights had become a joke.
This just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
Yet 2 years ago, Fife Symington made this startling about-face to CNN.
The lights were really brilliant, and it was just fascinating. I mean, it was enormous. It just felt otherworldly. You know, in your gut, you could just tell that it was otherworldly.
Yes, you heard that right. The governor claims he also saw a strange, unexplainable craft.
And I suspect that unless the Defense Department proves us otherwise, that it was probably some form of an alien spacecraft.
And still more officials keep coming forward, even the man who investigated UFO sightings on behalf of the American Air Force.
I became clearly convinced that there was substance to what was being reported, in that we had ground visual, ground radar, airborne visual, and airborne radar confirmation of some of these sightings.
Suzanne Hansen is one New Zealander who's following overseas developments with a keen interest. She's the head of UFocus and travels around the country investigating UFO sightings.
Sightings are increasing worldwide, contrary to what a lot of people will try to say. They are increasing worldwide. They are increasing in New Zealand.
37 UFOs have been reported in New Zealand this year.
So can you describe to me, please, what happened from that point when you were out in the hay paddock and you actually saw this light?
Suzanne says most sightings can be explained. They're either natural phenomena, satellites or aircraft.
This is some footage from Mexico of what appears to be a fleet of unidentified objects.
But every year she claims there are unexplainable things seen in the sky. A lot of footage can be found on the internet. Much of it is simply hoaxes, and for the layman it can be hard to decipher what are just special effects. But Suzanne Hansen believes footage of the Phoenix Lights and the recent armada of craft seen in Mexico are credible. But some scientists say they don't care how many people see unexplained objects in the sky, that seeing is not believing. For them, only physical evidence will be proof. If UFOs do exist, why haven't they just landed on the White House lawn and said hello?
Well, there have been landings. There have been highly credible sightings and landings around the world, including in New Zealand, but one that springs to mind is the craft that was seen in the Rendlesham Forest in the UK many years ago.
What Suzanne is referring to is multiple UFO sightings over a US Air Force base that was armed with nuclear weapons in Britain in December 1980. These are the actual recordings made by Lieutenant Colonel Holt, the commander of the base, as he approached the unidentified craft.
They're ones in the north are moving, one's moving away from us. Moving out fast. One we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
2 years ago, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt spoke for the first time.
We suddenly observed a very bright red-orange object. It was oval and with a black center. It reminded me of an eye, and it appeared to be winking or blinking. It maneuvered horizontally through the trees with an occasional vertical movement.
Lieutenant Colonel Holt saw several craft that night, and he wasn't the only one. 24 hours earlier, 80 Air Force personnel witnessed a UFO over the base. Sergeant James Peniston was ordered to investigate.
As we approached it on foot, a silhouetted triangular craft about 9 feet long, 6.5 feet high, came into view. The craft was fully intact and sitting in a small clearing just inside the woods. The air around us was electrically charged, and we could feel it on our clothes, our skin, and our hair. Nothing in my training prepared me for what I was witnessing.
Admiral of the Fleet, former Chief of Defence of Britain and Chair of NATO's Military Committee, Lord Hill Norton, had this to say about the incident in a recent documentary.
If indeed what he says took place did take place, and why on earth should he make it up, then surely the entry of a vehicle from outer space, certainly not man-made, to a defence base in this country also cannot fail to be of defence interest.
The rest of the world in the main is far more open to the idea that there are entities or intelligences, UFOs, visiting our planet. And it very much surprises me that we are so behind in understanding that in New Zealand, given the fact that we have some spectacular sightings that have occurred here over the years.
Our most well-known sighting remains the Kaikoura lights. It was in late December 1978. The crew of a Safe Air flight reported seeing strange lights over the South Island. So a few days later, an Australian film crew boarded the Argosy to take a closer look.
We have an object confirmed by Wellington radar. It's been following us for quite a while. It's about 4 miles away, and it looks like a very faint star, but then it emits a very bright white and green light. Could that have been the planet Venus we saw as we came out of Christchurch?
No way, and planet Venus doesn't sort of pass beneath our aircraft.
Bill Startup was the Argosy's pilot. He's since had a stroke, but remembers the sighting well. At the time they said squid boat lights.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No.
Mutton birds?
No.
Neither of those things fit. They said, lighthouse lights?
No.
Bill's wife is Shirley Startup. Do you think it was a cover-up?
It was a cover-up of some description. Whether it was a cover-up of a foreign power testing aircraft or experimental craft, or a cover-up of visiting aliens or whatever, I think it definitely was. Yeah, it definitely had the feeling of being shushed up.
Yes, I think there was a bit of a cover-up in the hope that, okay, we'll forget it, the press will forget it, and it'll go away.
John Cordy was the air traffic controller at Wellington Airport who tracked the objects on radar.
No, I don't know what it was. They were unknown, flying, they were definitely flying. They were unidentified flying objects. The one major target that tracked out from Wellington stayed in its position for well over an hour, and it turned and followed the Argosy. So they were purposeful. They were not necessarily intelligently controlled, but they were purposeful.
This is the latest footage causing a stir in the world of ufology. Shot in Mexico, it was captured by 2 separate cameras. UFO buffs believe it shows smaller craft leaving a mothership or some sort of transporter.
The MOD actually takes no position on the nature of the UFO phenomenon, but I and some of my colleagues became privately convinced that whatever was going on, there were serious defence, national security and flight safety issues involved.
It's time to find out what the truth really is that's out there. We ought to do it really because it's right. We ought to do it because the American people, quite frankly, can handle the truth. And we ought to do it because it's the law.
While it's thought 95% of UFOs are later identified, that unexplainable 5% remain a mystery. Every year, more and more former defence officials are stepping forward. So far, there are 500 who want to testify in open congressional hearings about what they've learned about UFOs during their time in the military. Back here, one person hoping to get the answers in his lifetime is former Air New Zealand pilot George Richardson.
If one of these things arrived here and said, "Do you want to hop in? It's a one-way trip, you don't come back," I'd be the first bugger on board.
You'd be off.
I'd be off, yeah. Yeah. If it was a one-way trip, that wouldn't worry me, not one little bit.
See you, Earth.
Yeah, goodbye, yeah.